Jericho, a city of legends, power and wealth, a fortress that stood as a symbol of security, its massive walls towering above the land like an indestructible shield. Those who lived within them believed they were untouchable, that no force, human or divine, could ever bring them down. But beneath this illusion of strength, Jericho harbored a darkness few dared to speak of. It was a city consumed by idolatry, a place where rituals of blood and sacrifice were carried out in the name of false gods. Women, young and old, were offered as tributes, their fates sealed by a culture that worshipped perversion and corruption. Yet in the midst of this depravity, one woman dared to believe in something greater. Rahab, an outcast, a woman with no status, found herself at the center of a divine reckoning. She chose faith over fear, and when the walls of Jericho crumbled to dust, she was among the few who survived. Today, we unravel the shocking truth about this ancient city, its dark secrets, and the devastating judgment that reduced its pride to rubble. But more than that, we ask, is modern society repeating Jericho's mistakes? Are we trusting in false securities, blind to the warning signs of destruction? Stay with us as we uncover the truth that history tried to bury. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an eye-opening revelation like this. What do you think? Could the fate of Jericho be a warning for our time? Let us know in the comments. Jericho was more than just a city. It was a fortress, a beacon of human achievement in its time. Located near the Jordan River, it was a center of trade, wealth, and military might. The people of Jericho believed their city was eternal. After all, its walls were unlike anything the world had ever seen. Massive stone barriers, thick and impenetrable, built to withstand any attack. But beneath this grand display of strength lay a society teetering on the edge of destruction. The culture of Jericho was one of excess. Wealth flowed through its streets like a river, and with it came decadence, immorality, and corruption. The people indulged in pleasures without restraint, believing their gods demanded it. Idols made of gold and stone lined the temples, and the priests assured the people that the more they pleased these false deities, the greater their protection would be. They had forgotten what it meant to live with humility, to seek truth beyond their desires. One of the darkest aspects of life in Jericho was its brutal sacrificial system. Unlike neighboring cities where animals were often offered to the gods, Jericho took things further. Human sacrifices, often young women, were considered the highest form of devotion. These victims were chosen to appease the gods, to bring fertility to the land, to ensure victory in battle, or to ward off divine punishment. And the people of Jericho accepted this without question. It was simply their way of life. But what drove a civilization to such depths? How did they come to believe that shedding innocent blood was the key to prosperity? The answer lies in their pride. They had built a world where they dictated their own morality, where power and pleasure reigned supreme. They convinced themselves that they could control the forces of nature, that their rituals and sacrifices would secure their future. They believed they were invincible. Yet something was stirring beyond their mighty walls. The people of Jericho had heard whispers, rumors of a powerful nation, one that served a different God, a God unlike any they had ever known. The Israelites had been wandering the wilderness for decades, but now they were near, and they weren't just another tribe seeking a new home. They came with a mission, a divine purpose, and they carried with them the terrifying promise that Jericho's days were numbered. Panic spread among the people, but their leaders assured them there was nothing to fear. After all, no army had ever breached Jericho's walls. No enemy had ever set foot inside their city against their will. They trusted in their own strength, their gods, and the rituals they had practiced for generations. But not everyone was so sure. There were those who sensed that something was different this time, that their gods were silent in the face of an approaching storm. And in the heart of the city, a woman named Rahab was about to make a decision that would change the course of history. Rahab was not a noblewoman. She did not come from wealth, nor did she hold a position of power. She was a harlot, an outcast in many ways, yet she saw what others refused to acknowledge. She had heard of the God of Israel, and unlike the rest of Jericho, she believed. She understood that no wall, no matter how thick, could stand against a force greater than human hands could build. One night, 2 Israelite spies entered the city, sent to gather information before the coming invasion. It was a dangerous mission, and if they were caught, they would be executed without hesitation. But Rahab, risking everything, took them in. She hid them on the roof of her home, shielding them from the city guards who searched for them. When confronted, she sent the soldiers in the wrong direction, giving the spies time to escape. Why would she do this? Why betray her own people? It wasn't out of hatred for Jericho, it was out of faith. She had seen the truth. She knew that Jericho's strength was an illusion, that their gods were powerless, and that destruction was coming. She chose to align herself with something greater, to trust in the one true God instead of the crumbling foundations of her own city. The spies, recognizing her faith and courage, made her a promise. When the time came when Jericho fell, she and her family would be spared. They told her to mark her home with a scarlet cord so that the Israelite army would know not to harm those inside. And with that, they fled, carrying back their report of the city's defenses and the unlikely ally who had risked everything to protect them. Meanwhile, inside Jericho, life continued as if nothing had changed. The people still gathered at their temples, still performed their sacrifices, still convinced themselves that their walls would hold. But outside, the Israelites were preparing for something that would shake the world. Then came the day of reckoning. The Israelites did not storm the gates or launch an immediate attack. Instead, they did something that left the people of Jericho in disbelief. They marched. Day after day, for 6 days, they walked around the city, their footsteps echoing through the streets. They carried the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred symbol of their faith, but they raised no weapons. They uttered no war cries. They simply marched. The people of Jericho mocked them at first. They laughed, jeered, confident that these strange wanderers posed no real threat. But as the days went on, unease began to spread. Why weren't the Israelites attacking? Why weren't they afraid? And why did their silence feel more terrifying than the loudest of battle cries? Then on the 7th day, everything changed. The Israelites circled the city one final time, and at the appointed moment, they let out a mighty shout. And at that instant, the walls of Jericho, the great impenetrable walls that had stood for generations, collapsed. In an instant, the city's greatest strength became its greatest weakness. The people of Jericho had placed their trust in stone, in rituals, in false gods. But none of it could save them when divine judgment came. The city was overrun, its wealth meaningless, its power reduced to dust. And yet, amidst the devastation, one house stood untouched. Rahab's home, marked by the scarlet cord, remained standing as a testimony to the power of faith over fear. Jericho's story is not just an ancient tale, it is a warning. How often do we place our trust in things that will ultimately fail us? Wealth, power, traditions, even our own wisdom. None of it is permanent. And yet, generation after generation, people make the same mistake, believing that their walls, whether physical or metaphorical, will protect them. But history proves otherwise. So what about today? Are we any different? Do we blindly trust in the things of this world, ignoring the warnings around us? Are we repeating the mistakes of Jericho, building up false securities while judgment looms on the horizon? If you've made it this far, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think modern society mirrors Jericho in any way? Or do you believe we've learned from history? We want to hear your perspective. And if you're finding this deep dive into Jericho's hidden truths fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because the next part of this story is even more shocking. Jericho had fallen. The mighty city that once stood as a testament to human power and arrogance lay in ruins. Its walls, the very thing that had made it feel invincible, were nothing more than shattered stone. The people who had trusted in their gods, in their rituals, and in their wealth were either dead or captured. What they had believed to be their ultimate protection had crumbled in an instant. But as the dust settled, one thing was clear. This was not just a military conquest. This was something greater, something beyond human strategy. This was judgment. The destruction of Jericho was not simply the result of an army's strength or a well-planned attack. It was a demonstration of a power far greater than human hands could wield. For centuries, people have debated, was Jericho's fall a supernatural event? Was it truly divine judgment, or was there another explanation? Some have tried to rationalize it, claiming that perhaps an earthquake happened at just the right time, weakening the foundation of the walls. Others have suggested that the constant marching of the Israelites caused vibrations that weakened the structure. But can such coincidences really explain why only one household remained untouched in the midst of total destruction? Why Rahab and her family were spared when the rest of the city perished? And what about the psychological state of the people of Jericho leading up to the attack? There are accounts suggesting that the prolonged presence of the Israelites outside the city created fear, paranoia, and unrest within its walls. Some historians believe that the psychological pressure alone could have weakened the morale of the people, making them easier to defeat. But none of these theories explain the most crucial detail: why Jericho, a city that had stood strong for generations, was completely reduced to rubble in a single moment. What's even more fascinating is how this event echoes throughout history. Jericho is not the only example of a society that believed it was too powerful to fall, only to be suddenly and completely destroyed. Think about great empires that once ruled the world. The Babylonian Empire, the Roman Empire, even more recent civilizations that once seemed untouchable. Every single one of them rose to power, built their own walls, sometimes literal, sometimes ideological, and eventually crumbled. The pattern repeats itself over and over again. And that raises an even bigger question. Are we living in another Jericho moment right now? Modern society has built its own walls, though they may not be made of stone. We trust in our systems, our wealth, our technology, believing that they make us invincible. We convince ourselves that we are secure, that nothing can bring us down. But are we truly safe? Or are we just repeating the arrogance of Jericho, placing our faith in things that will inevitably fail? Consider this. How many times throughout history have people believed that their way of life was unshakable, only for it to collapse in an instant? The Great Depression wiped out fortunes overnight. The fall of the Berlin Wall shattered decades of division in a matter of hours. Even in recent times, we've seen global crises that have exposed just how fragile our world really is. And yet, just like the people of Jericho, many still refuse to see the warning signs. They mock the idea that destruction could come, that things could change in an instant. But history has a way of repeating itself. But let's go back to Rahab, the woman who chose faith over fear. She didn't have power, she didn't have status, but she had something greater. She recognized the truth before it was too late. She made a choice that saved not only her own life, but the lives of those she loved. And because of that choice, she became part of something far greater than herself. Did you know that Rahab's story doesn't end with the fall of Jericho? She didn't just survive, she was given a new life among the Israelites. And what's even more incredible, Rahab became an ancestor of King David. And not just David, her lineage would eventually lead to Jesus Christ himself. Think about that. A woman from a corrupt, doomed city, someone considered unworthy by society, became part of the greatest story ever told. It's a reminder that no matter where you come from, no matter what your past looks like, you have a choice. You can cling to things that will eventually fall, or you can choose to put your trust in something greater. So where do you stand? Are you holding on to walls that could collapse at any moment, or are you seeking something that will truly last? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think history is repeating itself? Is our modern world facing its own Jericho moment? Or do you believe we've learned from the past? Let's talk about it. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss content like this. The next part of this story takes an even deeper look into the lessons Jericho leaves behind. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. The story of Jericho is one of power, pride, and an ultimate fall. But it's also a story of warning, one that echoes through time, whispering a truth that civilizations have repeatedly ignored. What happened to Jericho wasn't just about the collapse of walls. It was about the collapse of an entire way of life, a belief system built on false gods and human arrogance. But Jericho wasn't the first city to fall, and it certainly wasn't the last. Look around today. The world is filled with modern Jerichos, nations, systems, and ideologies that believe they are invincible, economies that claim they can never fail, leaders who believe they are untouchable, societies that scoff at history, convinced that they have outgrown the mistakes of the past. Yet history tells a different story. Think of the Titanic, a marvel of human engineering, built with the confidence that it was unsinkable. People boarded that ship believing in its invincibility. And then, in a single night, everything changed. The ship that was designed to withstand anything met its match in the icy waters of the Atlantic. Jericho had its walls. The Titanic had its steel hull. Both fell because their creators placed too much faith in human strength and too little in the unseen forces at play. The same pattern repeats throughout history. The Roman Empire, once the most powerful force on earth, collapsed under its own corruption and arrogance. The financial systems of the world have seen crashes that left entire nations in ruins. The illusion of control has always been just that, an illusion. And that leads us to an uncomfortable question. Are we next? Are we, as a society, building walls that we think will protect us, all while ignoring the warnings that destruction is coming? Are we placing our faith in things that seem strong but are actually fragile? It's easy to assume that the problems of the past won't happen again. We tell ourselves that we're smarter now, that technology and progress have made us immune to the downfalls of previous generations. But doesn't every great civilization believe that right before it collapses? The truth is, we are more vulnerable than we like to admit. The world today is built on a fragile foundation. One economic crash, one global conflict, one unexpected disaster, and everything we think is permanent could disappear in an instant. But what if Jericho's story isn't just a warning, it's also a lesson? Rahab's decision to trust in something greater saved her life. She didn't just escape destruction, she became part of something eternal. She was given a new identity, a new future, a new legacy. And that raises a deeply personal question. What are you putting your trust in? Are you relying on things that can be taken away? Are you confident in systems that may not last? Or are you seeking something that stands beyond time, beyond walls, beyond the rise and fall of civilizations? The people of Jericho thought they had all the answers until the walls came down. Will history repeat itself, or will we learn before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think today's world is heading toward a collapse like Jericho? Or do you believe we've learned from history? We want to hear your perspective. And if you're finding this deep dive fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. Because trust me, this story isn't over yet. History is a cycle, one of rise and fall, power and collapse, arrogance and reckoning. Jericho is not just a city lost in the pages of the past. It is a symbol, a reflection of what happens when people put their faith in human strength and ignore the warning signs of destruction. But here's the thing about Jericho. It didn't fall without warning. The people had heard about the Israelites. They knew what had happened to other nations that stood in their way. They heard about the parting of the Red Sea, the victories won without conventional weapons, the God who led these nomads through the wilderness with signs and wonders. And yet, despite all of this, they refused to change. They could have surrendered. They could have chosen to abandon their gods, their corrupt ways, and seek mercy. But instead, they clung to their old ways, their traditions, their false securities, right up until the moment the walls crumbled beneath them. Now step back for a moment and think about today. How often do we see warning signs but ignore them? How often do we hear truth and dismiss it because it's inconvenient? How often do we, like the people of Jericho, convince ourselves that we are safe, when in reality, the ground beneath us is already beginning to crack? Think about the state of the world today. Look at the economy. Markets fluctuate, inflation rises, financial systems that once seemed indestructible now teeter on the edge. We are more interconnected than ever, yet with that comes a vulnerability we don't like to admit. A single event in one part of the world can send shockwaves through economies, causing recessions, job losses, and collapses that were never supposed to happen. Look at society, values shifting at a rapid pace, cultures embracing things that once would have been unthinkable. Morality, once seen as an unshakable foundation, is now relative. Right and wrong are blurred. People celebrate excess, indulgence and self-reliance, much like the people of Jericho did. Look at technology. Powerful, yes, but also dangerous. Artificial intelligence, data collection, mass surveillance, the very things that promise security can just as easily be used to control, manipulate, and deceive. And then look at human nature itself. Despite all the advancements, all the knowledge, all the lessons history has tried to teach us, people still chase after the same things: power, pleasure, and self-preservation. The same things that led to the downfall of Jericho. So here's the real question. Are we ignoring the warning signs? Are we like Jericho, assuming that because nothing has happened yet, nothing ever will? That because we feel safe now, we are safe forever? That because our walls, whether literal or metaphorical, are still standing today, they won't crumble tomorrow? The fall of Jericho wasn't just a military event. It was a divine statement, a message that no human power can stand against ultimate truth. No fortress can protect those who are blind to the reality of what's coming. And if history has shown us anything, it's that every Jericho has its breaking point. But here's the good news. Destruction is not inevitable for everyone. Rahab saw the truth before it was too late. She made a choice that saved her, and today that same choice still exists. It's not about physical walls or military battles. It's about where you place your trust. Do you put it in systems that can fail, in leaders who can fall, in wealth that can disappear overnight? Or do you put it in something that stands outside of time, beyond the rise and fall of civilizations? The world is changing, fast. And if we don't take a moment to stop, to recognize the patterns, to see the warning signs, we may find ourselves in the same position as Jericho, realizing the truth too late. So what do you think? Are we living in another Jericho moment? Are we watching the cracks form in the walls of modern society, even as people refuse to see them? Or do you believe that the world will continue as it always has? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're finding this discussion thought-provoking, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next, because we're not done yet. The final part of this story will reveal the biggest lesson we can take from Jericho, and trust me, it's something you don't want to miss.